The future. It's always hard to predict where the world is going, yet I would argue it's harder to predict where the car world is going. And that's because it's exposed to two very painful points. The first is a comparison to any other industry. You look at any business you want and then add a lot of zeros, and only then do you arrive at the car world. So that means if you make the wrong bet on something, that's not just a bad day at the office, that could mean the end of times for your company. And then there's the joy of joys, and that's politics. Like back in the day, it was like one, maybe two guys would dream up this car, sell it, and now it's a classic. But here, you look at something like this and you would think it's dreamed up by engineers, designers, and product planners, and they put the car out. You would be wrong. You see, in the car world today, you have a partner whether you like it or not, and that is every government around the world where you want to sell this car. So, now that I have your attention, let's talk about two very humongous gambles and the future of Volkswagen. Now, to kick off this discussion and dissect the first of two very large gambles on the part of the Volkswagen Group, we need to rewind to about a month and a half ago when I was over at the Frankfurt Auto Show kicking off the World Car Awards season. It was there that Volkswagen chose to introduce to the world its ID3 electric car. Now, you would look at this thing and think, well, it's kind of like a gussied up Golf EV. And that really is the understatement of the century, because a Golf EV, it was kind of cool, but it really was a science project, kind of a kit car, in that it was sold in very small numbers. This thing, the ID3, is designed to be a mass-produced, serial production electric car. But much more importantly, it's not just the car, it's the platform that underpins the car. Knowing the Volkswagen Group, there's some three-letter abbreviation. In this case, it's the MEB. Auf Deutsch, it's Modular Elektrobekausten something or other. Translated to you and I, that is Modular Electric Car Toolkit. And what this is going to do, it's going to underpin a host of Volkswagen electric vehicles, not just with the Volkswagen brand name on it. Now, the most famous one you're going to see on this platform is something that you've already seen, well, back in the 60s, and they've been trotting around as a concept car, and that is the ID Buzz, which is the bus, but the electric version of it. This is a rear-wheel drive platform, an EV rear-wheel drive platform. So remember, we've driven two derivations of the BMW i3, and that is probably one of the most fun EV cars to drive because it is rear-wheel drive. I know it looks very strange. I did speak with some of the Volkswagen engineers, and they did talk about how they played around with the idea of making a front-wheel drive version. But the way they say it is they didn't have enough weight with the EV motor and some of the bits that went around it to make it work from a driving dynamics point of view. So they elected to put the motor in the rear and then leave enough space in the front for two things. Number one, to put an electric motor to make an all-wheel drive derivation. My guess is for that coming bus or crossovers. And number two, to keep the front end low enough on the car versions, the ID3, to do two things. Number one, to lower the coefficient of drag. And number two, you look at the front of an ID3, and the only way to describe it, it's got that modern look, kind of like a 787. It's got that very cool futuristic look, and that's because there's nothing in the front that it has to cover. Now, all of that's fine and good, but this is still an electric car, so we have to discuss the battery. And here, what's the old saying? It's good to be the king, or at least the Volkswagen Group, because you have a huge R&D budget. So in the case of this ID3, from day zero, meaning the launch, there's going to be not one but three battery options on offer. It's going to be a 45, a 58, and a 77 kilowatt hour battery. So Volkswagen has said that they put this thing on offer already. I mean, you can go to a website and you can put a deposit down to actually buy a car. It's not just, hey, I want a catalog. And so far, they claim 30,000 people have handed over about $1,200 US. They're saying the base price of this thing is going to be about 33,000 US. And to give you an idea of the grand scheme of things, the Volkswagen Group, meaning everybody, all the brands, the Bentleys, the Lamborghinis, everybody, we're going to have to talk about Lamborghini at some point, it's about 11 million units a year worldwide. The Volkswagen brand alone is 6 million of that annually. So huge percentage. And then if you look at some of their other more pedestrian brands, the Seats and the Skodas of the world, that's an additional 1.6, 1.7 million units a year. So it's definitely a business that's made up of more accessible serial production cars. So the idea of switching a number of these things over to EV is a huge gamble. And they did show us at Frankfurt, not just this ID3, they showed us a Seat version of it, which I have to say the Seat probably looked better, at least in my eyes. Now at about this point, you're looking at the screen and you're like, wait a minute, if this is so important to an EV, why haven't we talked about the range? Well, I got good news and I got bad news. In that 77 kilowatt hour battery, 342 miles of range, pretty damn good, better than most Teslas out there. However, that is two things. Number one, on European cycle, and number two, I would tell you, hey, let's wait for the US cycle, but that would be like waiting for Godot, because the ID3, it ain't coming to the US. And this is the point of the discussion where we not only need to switch gears to another huge yet disparate gamble on the part of the Volkswagen Group, we need to switch gears to another region of the world, and that's last week in Chattanooga, Tennessee, or as the folks at Volkswagen call it, Chattanooga, very close to Tuscaloosa. You see, since 2011, they've been manufacturing Passats there as well as Atlases. And they chose to use the factory there as the place for the world premiere for the 2020 Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport SUV. There's really no nice way to put this. Think of it as like a poor man's X6. They took an Atlas, they made it a swoopy rear end, and it's a 5-seat SUV. But if you look a little bit more into it, there's a lot more going on. Turns out they changed some of the bodywork in the front, like the fenders, the bumper. They changed the grille, the lights. It actually looks pretty good in person. The rear taillights change. And then inside, they made it a bit fancier. It's got a different steering wheel. One can have heated seats in the back, cooled seats in the front. And then something really important, they've made it shorter by a little bit, made it lower by a little bit, and the most important point is there's still going to be a V6 and a 4-cylinder on offer, but now the 4-cylinder can be had with all-wheel drive. Now this is the point of the discussion where we're going to take a detour and talk a little bit inside baseball. As you can imagine, there is no nonstop flight between Los Angeles, California and Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I changed planes in Dulles. I get on my connector flight, and there was a guy in a business suit sitting in my seat. I say to him as nicely as I can, hey man, you're in my seat. And couldn't have been nicer, responded in a South African accent, goes to his seat, couple rows back, and then the ball drops. Johan Denetian, you remember him from Audi, and then Infiniti, and then Cadillac. Well, now he's back at the Volkswagen Group, and he's the COO of Volkswagen North America. And if you remember, this guy, man, he can see the future. He kind of had the right product set at Cadillac. I don't agree with his naming strategy, but this man, he knows, no way, nice way to put this, he knows his shit. And we're sitting there at the factory after they pulled the tarp off the car, the fanfares died down, and we're just kind of catching up. And he points to that car and he says, that is not an SUV that has a swoopy back. What that is the replacement to the full-size 5-passenger sedan. Now, I thought about that, and I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. Not only is that a brilliant statement, but it's completely spot on. Because how many years have I told you since we drove, the first one you and I drove together was the GLE 63S in Österreich. I told you it's a utility vehicle with a lot less utility, and I just didn't understand them. But now that I see everybody's doing these things, and I see who's buying them, I kind of get it now. Not that I would buy one, but I kind of get why people get these things. It's got all the functionality of a Passat or an Avalon, but it's a little bit higher. Most of them are had an all-wheel drive, so they can go a couple more places. Not like you can go rock crawling, but you're able to go to the trailhead or deal with inclement weather. And so all of a sudden, you have the rebirth of the full-size, in this case, full-size American car. Even though it's got a German badge on it, it's built in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You look at Volkswagen of America and what they've been selling over the past couple of years, by far their best seller is the Tiguan, followed by the Atlas. And if I'm looking into the future only like a year or two, I would say this cross sport Atlas is going to be number 3, whether you agree with this concept of these things or not. Now, there was something that happened, and I don't think Volkswagen really planned on this. They gave us a tour of the factory while we were there. So they have these screens throughout the entire factory, and they share really relevant information, like sales information. And more importantly, are they at plan, ahead of plan, or are they behind plan? Now here's the bad news, at least for the Volkswagen Group, and I don't think this was intended. You got a group of international media floating around your company, and you got your numbers, not just sales, but your plan numbers, and for the Atlas, man, look great. For the Passat, wow, way behind plan. Now that's not exactly a surprise to you and I, because we're seeing the numbers shrink in the sedan segment, whether it's mid-size, compact, or small sedans. And Passat, it's not impervious to that. But I would argue Passat, it's losing ground where Toyota and Hyundai and Kia, they're growing in that segment. Now, it may not be readily apparent, but there was an incredibly good reason we just went down this rat hole, because it is the bridge back to the first, and I would argue, much larger gamble on the part of the Volkswagen Group, electrification. But we're talking about the US and SUVs. So if they're not going to bring the ID3 to the US, wouldn't it stand to reason that there's going to be either a crossover or an SUV that's going to be built off of the ID3 MEB platform? The answer would be yes. They currently call it the ID Cross. Get it? The Atlas Cross Sport, ID Cross. Could be called the ID4. There's a lot of speculation on that. And effectively, it is going to be a Tiguan-sized SUV that's going to be built on that ID3 platform. So a lot of things are going to be the same. Rear-wheel drive with the option of all-wheel drive, the battery at the bottom, struts, multi-link in the back. No discussion on batteries and power and all that kind of stuff, but they have confirmed this is the vehicle from the MEB architecture that is coming to the US. Now, that's a two-step process. So to start, they are going to make these in Germany at the factory that's going to be producing this ID3. But then they're going to switch production to this Chattanooga factory. So the Chattanooga factory is going to go from 2 to 3 cars. And if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, they kept the ID3 in Europe because it is a 5-door hatchback. Hatchbacks sell well in Europe, they don't sell well in the US. But I would argue it's way more than this, because if you see this thing in person, it's not really a Golf. It's actually a very tall vehicle. It's more along the lines of like a C-Max, which has been selling well in Europe, those types of vehicles, although I think they're incredibly ugly. But more importantly, the reason why that vehicle, meaning not this Jaguar, but the ID3, is in Europe, the world has changed there. A combination of cities like London that have long-standing relationships with congestion charges, and you're seeing more cities that are doing congestion charges, and then you're seeing whole countries doing away with diesel-powered cars so quickly. Volkswagen is putting a gamble that, you know what, if we're taking your diesel-powered car away in a couple of years, here's an option for you. And if you look at Northern Europe, you're already seeing huge and quick adoption of EVs up there to the point where Teslas are like the best sellers. So I get why Volkswagen is doing that. Do I agree? No, I think there is a market for maybe a sporty version of an ID3, kind of like a GTI ID3. But if we're talking speculation, we need to circle back to the US and the other huge gamble on the part of the Volkswagen Group, as evidenced by this Atlas Cross Sport. And the reality is, in the US, the world ain't changing as fast. It's changing, but it's not changing as fast. Let's take that congestion charging example that's spreading like wildfire in Europe. Sadly, my hometown, New York City, is going to be trying it out. And unfortunately, I was one of the guinea pigs in London. I was living there when they first introduced it. And I get why they do it. I see the theory. It's trying to change people's behavior. It didn't do any of that. People just pay more money to drive in London. The traffic is just as bad, if not worse. And that is going to be the same thing in cities like New York. And something tells me people in the US are a bit more pragmatic. I don't see congestion, at least I hope, I don't see congestion charging growing as fast as it has in Europe. But then you get into the concept of what people want in size in places like the US. And that's why these things sell like hotcakes. The only time it's going to change, we hit price elasticity when gas hit $4 or $5 a gallon. Sadly, here in California, we are above $4 a gallon, but that's not because of the price of a barrel of oil or instability in the Middle East. It's because of the thieving criminals in Sacramento, but that's a discussion for another day, as well as the congestion charging discussion. But if I'm really boiling this all down, there's really only one gamble, and that is the ID3. That is making serial production, very high production EV cars. I think we're going to get there. I think it's going to take a long time to get there, and I think it's going to take a longer time to make it profitable for EVs for companies like Volkswagen Group. But in the interim, the reason why there is the other gamble, all these different slicing and dicing of SUVs, it's because those vehicles are so profitable and they're making all the money, and those are the ones paying the freight for the EV technology and the experimentation over on this side of the fence. And with that, I am just one man. Kumo is just one dog, yet these are our collective thoughts on two rather large gambles on the part of the Volkswagen Group, but now you can see they're very much connected. This is the point of the discussion where we turn it around to you, and we're going to ask you a couple of questions here. Question number one, good idea or bad idea that the ID3, meaning the car version, is not coming to the US? Give me why or why not. And then number two, where do you see the future of the Volkswagen Group going? Specifically, I am only asking about the Volkswagen Group, not Daimler-Benz, not Jaguar Land Rover, not General Motors, not Toyota, maybe Ford. Because Ford, they're part of this whole EV investment as well as in pickup trucks. So we could talk about where do you see that JV going? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all word, MotoManTV all word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.